Good afternoon or good morning to the many people who have joined us today for this Santander Insight panel on travel, tourism, and recovery. Thank you as well to our distinguished panelists and to James Harding, our moderator. We are very excited and very honored to have you all. My name is Alejandra Quindelan. I am Head of Research and Public Policy at Banco Santander. For the past 14 years, Santander has been organizing these conferences and panels, bringing bankers, business leaders, academics, authorities, politicians, and others for an open dialogue in issues facing banks and also our stakeholders. This dialogue is absolutely central as we start to emerge from the pandemic and face such daunting challenges as solid and inclusive recovery, political uncertainty, climate change, as well as opportunities in rapid digitalization. We created the Santander Insights virtual panels last year as a response to the pandemic, as it enabled us to continue the tradition of the Santander Banking Conference. We are hoping to return to a physical format for the conference this year, and in fact, we will have in November 3rd our next banking conference, and we really hope you can join us. For today's panel, we encourage you to join the dialogue by asking questions to the panelists, and you can do so by clicking on the Ask a Question button that you will see at the top of your screen. The moderator, James Harding, will be able to see these questions and pass them through to the speakers. We are honored to have again such a distinguished group with us today to discuss this crucial human, social, and economic question. When can we start traveling again? We are eager to hear you. Over to you, James, and thank you very much.
Alejandra, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for making the time this hour to join us today. There was a moment in my office just now where I asked a colleague, how are you? And they said, okay, I could really do with a summer holiday. And I can't help feeling that pretty much everyone here is joining us, partly out of an interest in economics and the finance of travel and tourism and the global hospitality industry, but maybe a little bit just because we all personally want to know what the prospects are for us returning to travel. We're incredibly lucky, as Alejandro just said, to have the group with us that we do. In particular, I just wanted to say thank you to the Vice President, Margarita Esquinas, because we know the demands on your time, particularly at this time. And also because given your responsibility as Vice President for the European way of life, nothing feels quite as European as the business of being able to move freely around Europe, and the fact that travel has collapsed so entirely in the past year has really changed the way in which we see ourselves and our lives. So I look forward to talking to you. I'm going to ask, if I might, before I come to you though, Vice President, I'm going to actually start, if I might, and before I come to Jeff Higley, who I hope will tell us a bit about hotels and hospitality and perhaps the life that is being breathed back into that, and to Maribel Rodriguez to talk to us a little about how the industry organizes and campaigns to make sure that we understand how travel and tourism resume. I was actually going to start, if I might, with Luis Gallego, because, well, to be perfectly honest, Luis is not just the chief executive of the International Airlines Group. He's also got a bunch of planes parked at the airport nearest me. And I suppose I'm most interested to know when he thinks those are going to start taking off. And Luis, will you tell us, what do you think is the outlook for the next 3 months? We'll talk in this conversation about the short term and the long term, but let's start with the here and now. What's the outlook for the next 3 months?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me, Santander, to this event. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And we still have a lot of uncertainty about the future, but it looks like the end of this nightmare is going to be soon. So it depends on the different markets that we are operating. You know that, for example, here in UK, we have a list of countries with different colors. We still have a reduced green list. We want to include more countries in that list. And we consider that, for example, there are countries like US that has to be in the list very soon, because when you see the number of vaccinated people there and vaccinated people in UK is one of the best in the world. And I think we need to take advantage of the situation that we have right now. So what we are hoping is that last week of June or July maximum, for example, we need to have the North Atlantic corridor open. You know also that the situation in Europe is changing. I think that the COVID passport that has just been approved is going to help a lot to this process. And we have different situations in different countries. You have the Mediterranean countries where the tourism is so important for them that they are opening because they want to have a summer. And I think we have the conditions to have a summer. So the situation is different in the different countries, but that's where we are. And I hope that in a couple of months, we are going to start seeing a lot of aircraft again flying, not on ground.
Luis, thank you. Vice President, can I ask you the same question? The next 3 months, from here until the end of August, what do you foresee as being the extent of freedom of travel within Europe?
First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, Santander. I'm delighted to join you on this very topical issue. Before I think discussing the 3 months to come, one should start from the 16 horrible months that we're leaving behind. I think these 3 months will not happen in a vacuum. We are coming from a nightmare scenario, a science fiction scenario that shaped the beginning of this commission. And I think that the European response to the pandemic, both on the health side, with very specific and important initiatives we took, and on the recovery side, on the economic side, are now creating the conditions for this new chapter, which I hope will be the first stage of the end. Let me spare a few words on each of these two tracks, because I think are important and I think should not be trivialized or banalisé, as the French would say. They are very important moments in the history of European Union. There were really Rubicon moments, real federal moments. First, on the health side, we are deploying the biggest vaccination program in the history of humanity. Never before someone bought so many vaccines for so many people from so many companies in such a short time and basically for free. This is unheard of. It's unthinkable. It's historic, given especially the rather limited competencies that the European Union has on health. Next to that, always on the health side, is of course the certificates, the EU COVID certificate, as we call it, since last week when it was agreed with by the Council and Parliament. Let me share on a personal note how frustrated I was at the beginning of this process, early January, where we were very few people around in Brussels thinking that this certificate would one day see the light. And I'm delighted to see that gradually this is now becoming one of the main tools for our return to normality. And on the economic, on the recovery side, there again, the Union took a Hamiltonian federal step with this mega bazookas of the recovery plan, recovery fund. For the first time in 70 years of European integration, the European Union is raising money from the markets, using our EU budget to raise money so that we can help the recovery and also shape the transition of our economies to digital and green realities. On top of that, we have very specific programs for short-term unemployment. Sure, we have the ECB mega liquidity program. We have a very relaxed framework for state aid approval. We have full flexibility in the funding of structural funds. To cut a long story short, we have left no stone unturned during the last 6 months to get where we are now.
And Vice President, I think can I just pick up on just on those first two, because I think you're right in the speed and the scale of changes and problems that the world's faced in the last year. It's easy to miss the milestones that have been passed, and I really do take that point. Can I just pick up though on the first two, the vaccination program, because the issue ahead of us is that even though the scale of the vaccination program has been enormous, it has inevitably been uneven. There are some areas and some groups of people who are more highly vaccinated than others. And how do you think about that in terms of enabling the greatest freedoms to the greatest numbers without adding to health risks, health security risks?
No, James, we're very confident that the European Union will reach our vaccination targets, which is 70% of the immunity of the general adult population in July. Our American friends, I think they will announce this milestone on the 4th of July, Independence Day. I think would be ready on the 14th of July, le 14 juillet, which I think is particularly well chosen European date to do it. And I think that although at the beginning, due to a number of certain uncertainty in deliveries, now we have a uniform level of vaccination across the European Union. We have a portfolio which is very stable. We have 55 plants producing the vaccines that we pre-purchase operating in Europe. We are also donating as much as we use ourselves to the developing world. So we are on track.
So by implication, I mean, I appreciate there will be some people listening in some places who say, look, yes, 70% may be the target and maybe the overall number, but there will be pockets where that's not the case. I don't want to really go down that rabbit hole. What I do want to get a sense from is follow the logic through that if on the 14th of July, you have that moment of freedom and fraternity, you have everyone vaccinated at that level, are you saying, Vice President, then there is no real logic not to have a full summer of travel and tourism?
Absolutely. And I would even say that this moment of opening up travel and tourism would actually happen before the 14th of July, once the certificate becomes part of real life, which we think will happen on the 1st of July, or rather by the 1st of July, because we now have the legal instrument, we have a legal agreement, and we also have about 19, 20 member states that are already testing technically the ways of hooking into the European platform. So we will be ready. We will be ready by the 1st of July, and the certificate will be able to prove either the vaccination, the negative PCR test, or the recovery from COVID. There will be 3 shells in the certificate, and any of these 3 shells will be the key to the mobility in Europe, and we hope worldwide as well.
And I just wanted to pick on that. I'm going to come to Maribel in a moment for the industry, but Vice President, the one question that emerges from that is, within a little over a month, you describe a world where we can all freely return to travel within Europe. That's clearly not the case in terms of travel from Europe to the rest of the world. And I wonder, in the way in which there's a big argument happening about distribution of vaccines globally, how you think about coordination of travel globally.
Yes, this is a very valid point. We have, of course, created the conditions when discussing our certificate to have it recognized by other blocs or other third countries across the globe. And we are confident that this will be the case one way or the other. But, as you rightly say, we have no way of legally enforcing this globally. And there we would very much hope that the industry, IATA, the United Nations tourism organizations, Maribel, everyone who can give us a hand would be very much welcome. But there is no legal way, if you like, for the European Union to enforce this certificate globally.
So, Vice President, thank you. I'm going to come back to you because I want to talk short term, but then I'd like us all to sort of think about the longer term, how things change structurally. But Maribel, the Vice President has passed you the problem of trying to coordinate the global travel industry. To an extent, that is your problem. I know that you're the CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Industry, so I think it seems like a reasonable ask. Can I ask you specifically, is there a forum where global governments, where the United States, where the EU, where Asian governments can come together and actually agree on something like a global COVID certificate?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting WTTC to this chat. Not yet. I mean, it should be, but there is not a clear forum where all we can talk together, get coordinated, and create a global framework to be able to resume the international travel, which is what we have been calling for since the beginning of the pandemic. But of what did happen, it has been a lot of different meetings, private and public sector. We have, as WTTC, working closely with more than 150 governments, including the EU, G7, and thanks, of course, Vice President, for your support on that, G20, OECD, because using those international platforms, we can set commitments from leaders to develop and implement the global framework. But of course, it hasn't been the case. Right now, we are in a much better position because we hope that what European Union is going to be doing, the COVID certificate and the vaccination certificate should be used worldwide. What we don't have to do is just wait and expect, and the other regions are going to do something different, and we are not going to be aligned, because we shouldn't forget that the customer, the client, they need to have a clear instruction. They need to know what to do, where to go. Still, last week, we were hosting an event in Madrid, and people from the US and the UK was asking, should I go? Can I go? What is the information that they have to receive? We have to build the confidence, but we need to remove the barriers. So we hope that by having this European certification, this can be replicated in countries or regions like Latin America and others. But as well as Luis said before, it's very important that we resume international travel between the US and Europe and within the European Union, because otherwise we are not, even if we are at a turning point right now and things are improving, we are still in survival mode. And the only way to move forward is to have clear rules and international mobility protocols.
And Maribel, that's what I wanted to ask you about. I'm alive to the fact that we're all brought together here by Santander, that as a bank, like all banks, it's got an experience of a global crisis. If you think back to 2008-9, it forced the world to think again about global coordination around finance. And a year ago, when the pandemic started, we started thinking about global coordination around health. And there was a real concern around the failure of global leadership around health. As we come out of this, there's a focus on organizations like yours to say, what's wrong here? Why don't we have single bodies that, as you say, set global rules for the way in which people can travel, what's expected of operators and what's expected of travelers?
I mean, it's going to be a lesson learned, because first of all, every country first, what they wanted to make sure is that they were making that their citizens, they were safe. So they look inside first. And then the second, which is the international mobility. In the beginning of the pandemic, hosted by by Saudi Arabia Kingdom, the G20, we organized the first ever G20 meeting between the private sector, from travel and tourism, and ministers, to have this open conversation and try to do what you were just explaining before. The difference between the economic crisis in 2009 versus now is like, the head of the states, they gathered together in a meeting at the G20 and they all sorted out. Now, tourism is not yet at the top of the agenda of the presidents of countries or prime ministers. Maybe from now on they will do that, because they will recognize how many jobs we have been losing, how affected, how many companies are still in survival mode, and job employment, women, minorities, all the results of the pandemic. But because what's a mixed crisis, it has been a little bit more difficult. That's our view. But of course, as an organization, what we have been trying to do is coordinate between all different key organizations, those meetings, those platforms, to resume international travel.
Maribel, thank you. I'm going to turn to Jeff, if I might, because Jeff, it feels as though you're the perfect linchpin for what's happening right now, but also, throwing things forward in the next year to 2 years. As the president of the BHN Group, if I understand it, not only are you holding events, but you're holding events not least for the hospitality and the hotels industry itself. So will you just give a sense of what the appetite is for people to get back together, and what those hoteliers are telling you about the look ahead for the next 3 to 12 months?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me here, James. I appreciate it. So the appetite is tremendous. Everyone wants to get out, move around. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago with 1,200 people in Atlanta, and it was the sheer joy on everyone's face to be there and be around their colleagues that they hadn't seen in 15, 16 months, and the business that starts taking shape. So we have an event planned for Los Angeles in July, in 2 months' time, about 60 days from now, called the America's Lodging Investment Summit, that in 2020, of January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit, we had over 3,000 people there. And the message we are getting loud and clear from people is that they want to travel there. They want to be part of it. They want to start conducting business. And most importantly, and this is from many of the CEOs of the hotel companies, is they want to lead by example. They want to show that travel is safe, that meeting at hotels is safe, that meeting in large groups is safe as long as the proper precautions are taking place. Maribel and the WTTC met in Mexico a couple of weeks ago. I guess it was three or 4 weeks ago now. And that set a tone for everybody that, let's start getting this message out to the masses that, we have to be part of the solution. And I think Maribel also hit it on the head, where the nail on the head in terms of the communication that's needed to make sure that this happens. We must have simple communications to ensure that travelers understand what they need to go to different places, particularly if it's international travel, which is clearly the big thing that we need to get the global travel and tourism industry really on its feet.
And Jeff, can I ask you then, because I suppose there are lots of people who are now predicting probably a stronger bounce back in terms of tourism in 2021 than they might have predicted even a few months ago in January or February. But there's still this prediction that in the longer term, possibly over the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see a kink in the graph around conferences and around business travel, that actually something structural will change as a result of the pandemic. Do you think that's likely to be the case or not?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if it'll be a kink. I think it's been explained to me a couple of times that the first 2/3 to 3/4 of getting back to the recovery is going to be relatively easy because everybody wants to get out and do that. So it's the last hurdles that will provide the biggest challenges when you're talking about vaccination rates and the use of the certificate that you're talking about here in the States. It's we're talking about it as the vaccination passport, and there's there are factions that don't want it. Governors are creating laws that say you cannot do this. It's not going to be legal to have that type of passport because of medical personal information. So I think we will see in leisure travel in particular here in the U.S. It's going very well, particularly to drive to markets, the resort markets. People are getting in their cars and traveling, and that's a good thing, obviously, to continue that message that it's okay to get out, it's okay to travel, it's okay to revenge travel, as it's being called. Everybody is pent up to do something fun because it's been so long. So, I don't know if I prescribe to the theory that in 2 or 3 years there will be a kink. Of course, there will be corrections along the way as the vaccination rate continues to climb, as we find out what booster shots will be needed along the course of that time. But I think in general, in the hotel space, in the hotel investment space, the people that I've talked to are very confident in the vaccine and what it's doing. And the conference I mentioned that I went to a couple weeks ago, we determined that roughly 85% of the attendees were vaccinated. So that's well beyond the 40% of adults that are vaccinated in the U.S. as of today.
Jeff, thanks. I want to use that point and sort of look ahead to begin to think about how things change in the future. And Vice President, I don't know who originally said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. So many people have said it. I don't know who said it originally. But sitting in where you are in Brussels, there must also be a moment that the EU thinks about the longer term issues of travel and tourism, 1 in 10 jobs, 10% of global GDP, but also what you might call quite a lot of exhaust, quite a lot of fumes out of the back of the travel industry, whether those are environmental, whether those are around quality of jobs, impact on, the structure and the economy of the European Union. Do you feel as though you've had a chance to stop and think properly about how that travel and tourism industry needs to be restructured?
Well, this is an excellent question / reflection, James. Let me tell you that, I've been around in Brussels for 30 years. I've been working within the meanders of the European system. And each time that we were discussing at the European level tourism, there was this perception that somehow Brussels or the Union should develop a self-standing tourism policy, which never happened, by the way. And it never happened for the very simple reason that tourism industry is so diverse. There are so many dimensions into it. And there is no way for the Treaty of the European Union to define an EU tourism policy. So I think we left this misconception behind. And now also due to the pandemic, as you rightly point out, we are now starting to see tourism exactly as it is, which is a multifaceted, multidimensional industry that concerns many sectoral policies, all of them of strong EU competence, but not 100% dedicated on tourism. So if you see the difference, this change in perception, I think this is the key that opens the future of policies on tourism and mobility at the European Union level for the future. In other words, we shall not design a commissioner for tourism or a directorate general for tourism, but we will make sure that all our systems, all our engine rooms that pertain to the freedom of movement under our single market legislation, to pertain to the green transition, to sustainability, to energy, to rural development, to structural health through our regional funds. We have so many instruments and so many policies that all together can make a difference to take tourism to the next level. And this is what will happen. Mm-hmm. Key, I would say central in all this policy design for the future is, of course, the so-called twin transitions, the green transition, the Green Deal, digital. In both of these areas, tourism can be one of the major beneficiaries sectors. I mean, there is huge margin for optimization and improvement through the green transition and the digital transition. 37% of the money that we'll be spending under our recovery instrument will be dedicated to green projects, and 20% of that money will go to digital projects. So the answer is yes. We are already thinking of the future, but we are thinking it differently, more intelligently, if you like, not through this traditional lens of developing a policy for a sector. Tourism is different, needs many policies to help one sector.
Vice President, thank you. I'm going to throw both of those points to Luis, if I might, both the green and the digital. Luis, can I start though, just by getting a sense from you? What's your forecast for the growth of the international travel industry? You know, we talk about an industry that, you know, occupies overall about 10% of global GDP. Do you think over the next 5 years that percentage is going to increase or decrease?
Okay.
Sorry.
I think, first of all, I think the global economy needs air travel. That's something that we have shown during this crisis. And we were talking before about the previous 15 months. And what we have seen is that all airlines, in order to survive, we needed to boost our liquidity. We needed to reduce our costs. Now we are going to have, all of us, a huge amount of debt, and we need to repay that. Yeah. So, because of that, we are going to be smaller for a period of time, and we need to generate enough cash flows to repay our debt. So I think after this crisis, we are going to have some people that they are not going to survive. It's going to be very difficult to repay this huge amount of debt. So I think we are going to have opportunities of consolidation in the sector. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a sector that, according to, for example, the different scenarios from Eurocontrol, from IATA, we will come back to the capacity that we had in 2019, around 2023, 2024. There is still some doubts about the business traffic, because it's true that all of us, we want to travel as soon as we can after 1 year in lockdown. BFR is also an important traffic, because you cannot spend 1 year without seeing your parents. But
Luis, sorry, can I just interrupt you for 1 moment? Can you just describe for us what that consolidation looks like? I think a lot of people would like to know what you envisage the future map of airlines is going to look like in Europe and globally.
I think we are going to have opportunities, and I say we because you know that IAG is a group that since the beginning we want to participate in the consolidation of the industry. And I think because we are going to have some players that they are not going to survive, we are going to have opportunities to develop our business. I think also that because all of us, we are going to be smaller, the businesses that we have together, the joint businesses, for example, the one that we have with American Airlines, with Finnair, is going to be in the North Atlantic, is going to be very important. And the partnerships with other carriers, for example, for us, Qatar is going to be key in order to have more presence in the East. So I think we need to combine better the different networks of the different carriers in order to propose to the customer a better experience.
And do you think, Luis, just to be specific about it, that you'll have these truly global networks, but you'll have what, 2 or 3 dominant airline groups in each of the big continents?
Yes, it's true. If you see what happened in the States, you see that now you have 3 big carriers, and you can add also for sure the Southwest. But in Europe, we still have more players that there are now in the States. So I think we are going to have also some opportunities for consolidation in the future. But it's true that with this crisis, everybody asks for money. Some of them, for example, to the governments. In our case, we decided to go to the market, and we did a capital increase, and we did all the activities that we needed to survive without the involvement of the governments, and that will give us freedom to take decisions.
And there is, I think, a lot of public awareness of, as you say, debt and financing for the airlines. It's very hard to see what the inflation pressures that you face might be. People have seen in the motor industry, semiconductors and things they hadn't expected. Are you facing these particular inflation pressures too?
What we don't want to have, and it's something that is started, we see that can start, is that everybody wants to come back as soon as possible to the previous situation. And you can have monopolistic behaviors in different airports, for example. So we need to fight against that, because at the end, as we have said, there is a lot of uncertainty about the future. For example, business traffic is still a question mark. So revenues is going to be a challenge for all of us. So we need to be more efficient, more flexible, and to have more taxes, and to have higher costs, for example, in the different airports, is not going to help to recover the economy and to recover the tourism.
Luis, thank you. While you were talking, in fact, while you and the Vice President were talking, we suddenly started getting loads of questions. So I'm going to start putting some of them to you. One of them actually is for you, is from Artur Zanon, who wants to know, given your comments about the North Atlantic corridor, when you think the South Atlantic corridor will be open. I suspect that Mr. Zanon is on one or other side of it.
Okay, I think that the situation in Latin America is different because you have a lot of countries in different situations. So you have some countries that you can fly, you have other countries that the rhythm of vaccination is different. For example, Iberia, during this crisis, they maintain a higher capacity, for example, that British Airways in North Atlantic, because they can fly to some places that is still not allowed when you consider North Atlantic. So I think we don't have a solution for Latin America. It depends of every country.
Okay, Luis, thank you. I said I'd come to you about the green transition. I want to ask you and I want to ask Maribel about this issue, about the extent to which sustainable travel, sustainable aviation hospitality really is changing. Can you just tell us in the IAG's experience, what you're seeing is fundamentally changing about the way in which the airline deals with its carbon emissions?
Okay, I think sustainability was key before this crisis, and I think it's going to be even more important after this. And as you said before, every crisis gives you an opportunity. IAG, for more than 1 decade, we have been leading the sustainability and to try to have net zero carbon emissions, and we have the commitment to arrive to that objective in 2050. For example, I think it was the 22nd of April, we also explained that we will be using 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. So I think the commitment is there, but we need to understand that it's not only a question of the airlines, it's a question of everybody. Because, for example, we want to use sustainable aviation fuel, but we need plants to produce sustainable aviation fuel, and we need cheap sustainable aviation fuel. If we don't have that, it's going to be impossible. For example, we want to reduce the CO2 emissions. For that, something that can help very soon is to have a single European sky. That is something that we have been trying for years, and it's not happening. With that, maybe around 10% of the emissions you can solve. Because I think, for example, we are not going to have a solution for the aircraft of the future, the hydrogen aircraft for the long haul. I think is not going to be soon. So we need to tackle all the things that we have right now on the table.
Luis, thank you. I'll come back to Margarita Skinas on that because I'm sure you've got a response, Vice President. But I just wanted to ask Maribel Rodriguez. Maribel, I'm sure that at the World Travel and Tourism Council, you sit there and lots of people say very good things about sustainable travel. There's a question here from Jason Sinclair who asks, as the coronavirus crisis wanes, what are airlines, hoteliers and others in the travel sector doing to be more sustainable? Do you think the issue of the carbon footprint is going to be as important an issue as it was pre-pandemic? And I suppose the question really is whether or not what people say is going to be matched by what they do.
Yes, all the companies, every single company is doing something about it. COVID has accelerated the sustainability agenda as well, the digital agenda, and sustainability has come to stay and bottom line. And of course, for the LTTC as well is a priority, and we work with our members for that. We even have a sustainability committee. We have one of our members of the board, which is guiding us to supervise all the efforts. For example, giving to you a couple of examples for your audience, Iberia changed its corporate structure to focus on sustainability as a key part of the business strategy. Other organizations like ANA as well, tour operators like Intrepid. I mean, any company is already on it. And at WTTC, we leverage the great efforts done by some of our members that they have already set science-based targets and are already working on plans to reduce their emissions. So it's, of course, at the core of the organization, and many companies are doing a lot of things. Now we explain and we want to share it, but they were already working on that in the past. And as I said before, there are things that you cannot achieve because they don't exist yet. Otherwise, it would happen. And sustainability can be cost effective, okay? It's not that you are sustainable and you have to pay more, because at the bottom line, you will be noticing when you are working in that sense. We need to continue to support the low carbon transition, of course, and we need to rebuild resilient and healthy destinations. It's not only about the companies, it's about the destinations, because in the past we used to talk about overcrowding. We don't talk about overcrowding anymore. but it exists. The problem was already there. So we need to still work with the destinations for that and create frameworks and destination management and planning, improving governance. And this is something we need to work again, public and private sector together, and implement a standard that strengthens sustainability practices.
Margot, thank you. Jeff, I just want to ask you about this, which is, it's really about the competitive advantage amongst hotel groups and the hospitality industry, given that everyone now is or in some way committing to sustainability. Is there any sense that there's a competitive advantage to be struck with how you handle your emissions, how you handle your environmental footprint? Or is it like hygiene? Is it like cleanliness? All travelers, all tourists expect it?
Well, I think to a degree all tourists expect it, but from the brand and the ownership perspective, there are specific brands that are geared more towards wellness and sustainability, and their clientele responds to that, and they'll pay premium pricing for that kind of an experience, which we know is what the hotel industry is all about. Even coming out of the pandemic, it's all about experience. And while, as Maribel said, that it's becoming more cost effective to have sustainability, there still is a premium pricing on building or renovating a hotel to become sustainable. And I would say that the vast majority of hotel owners and investors certainly want to participate in that, but the cost difference can be the difference between a project penciling out or just not being built because of that cost. So ultimately, it flows down to what the consumers will spend and what they're willing to spend their hard-earned money on in terms of that experience. And more are getting to that sustainable experience desire.
I suppose what I'm getting to, Jeff, is that we had Larry Fink from BlackRock on one of these Santander Insight conversations a few months ago. And the argument he obviously makes is that those businesses with purpose, particularly those businesses that address their environmental impacts, prove to be more successful, a better investment in the long run. And I don't know whether or not that's true. You'd like it to be true. I just don't know whether it is actually, from a financial perspective, true. And I wondered whether, when you looked at the hotel and hospitality sector, whether you're seeing a read across from sustainability commitments to financial performance.
I think there is when you talk about that niche market that attracts a certain set of consumers. But when you're talking about the masses, and you have big box hotels that are business travelers and corporate meetings and the like, I'm not sure that it's to that point yet, because those consumers may not be as engaged in that movement as the people that are going to those niche brands. So I think there's a movement through all of the major companies, Marriott, Hyatt, IHG, Hilton, et cetera. They are all developing certain products to fit that niche. And I think time will tell how successful those brands are in the long run with that approach.
I want to go back to the Vice President, if I might, partly because, Mr. Skinas, there's a bunch of specific questions for you. I also just thought it would be useful, particularly given the amount of time you spent in Brussels and Luis's point about the European Single Skies Agreement, unpicking that. Why has it been such a problem to achieve it, particularly as Luis is now saying that it would have not just economic benefits, but environmental ones?
Well, the Single Sky initiative, it's a European initiative, and it was initiated by a great Spaniard, Loyola de Palacio, who unfortunately passed away, but she was at the time the Vice President of the Commission in charge of energy and transport. And when she came to Brussels, September 99, that was her project. She said, Europe needs a single sky. And I can tell you, because I worked very closely with her at the time, that we pushed really hard from Brussels, our governments and the European Parliament, on an area. Transport policy is, as you probably know, it's a common EU policy where we had a very strong legal basis, and the industry, of course, was with us. But I regret to say that the final solution was not as optimal as we would have liked or as we had designed it, because we had designed a true federal system of a single sky above the continent. But then, Europe is Europe, and there were lots of corporatist reactions. There were people in Eurocontrol who thought that why should the EU mingle with something that is our core business, and we know how to do it. And then the air traffic controllers in each member state thought that this is a way of, stripping them of the prerogatives and pecunia and all sorts of privileges that they have got through the years. And the project, which was a European project that made perfect sense, at the end of the day was... I don't want to be very harsh on my evaluation, but we have some sort of common management of air traffic system in Europe, but this is not clearly the single sky as we had imagined it. Then I forgot another source of resistance, which just came to me, which was, of course, the military establishment and the defense and diplomatic establishment, that they think of the airspace as something that is totally reserved. And not more commercial.
I suppose, but the reason I asked, Vice President, is I think, the European Union often feels like an exercise in entropy, doesn't it? It sort of comes together and then falls apart a little bit. There are these pendulum swings. And given what you said at the beginning about the extent to which that this has been, as you said, this series of Rubicons around, federal organization, do you think that, just to Luis's point, there's a possibility now for a revival of some of that ambition around single skies?
Well, yes, but since IRG has a very strong Spanish connection, we don't want this to be a Don Quixote fight. We choose our fights wisely, and we want to make sure that it works. We spend 10, 15 years on this project. And the resistance was very, very strong. I'm talking to you in full openness, in the benefit of the time. In hindsight, we could have done better. Probably would have insisted, but we felt very alone in this battle. I must say, we didn't get much help
from the industry.
No, the industry was in favor, but we didn't get much help from the member states, because clearly when the diplomatico-military establishment started to react, Eurocontrol started to react, air traffic controllers started to react, and governments lowered the level of ambition. So the idea is always there. I fully agree with the president of IRG that this is a fantastic project, a European project, but the conditions have to be right to revisit it, and I don't think that we're yet there.
Can I ask you something completely different? Ingrid has written in with a question which is about EU recognition of Russian tourists with the Sputnik vaccine. And I suppose, likewise, Russian recognition of EU vaccines. How are you negotiating that, particularly travel for people moving from the European Union to countries on its borders?
We came up with a pragmatic solution, I think, which is that for our EU COVID certificate, we clearly indicate the type of vaccine that our citizens used, but under the understanding that 99% of the Europeans have been vaccinated by EMA-approved vaccines. But we opened the door to our member states to allow travel from third countries of people who have been vaccinated by non-EMA approved vaccines, provided that they think that the certificate of the third country provides the same level of assurance, if you like. And I think this is a practical solution which will help international travel.
And sorry, Vice President, because I think there is some concern about this, which is not around the certification, but the efficacy of the vaccine. So the judgment is on the certification, not on what percentage efficacy the vaccine has.
Yeah, but you know, the efficacy of the vaccines is not for politicians in Brussels to establish. This is for scientists, and when it comes to Europe, we have the Europe's Medicines Agency, EMA, which is the sole regulator, the scientific hub for approving the vaccines that we're using in Europe. If other vaccines used in other parts of the world are evaluated by the respective regulators. So we open the door for our member states regulators to provide a certain equivalence for international travelers, but it's not up to us to determine the merits of these vaccines.
Can I ask you, and I'm going to put this question to Louise, that Hugo Windsor wrote in with this really interesting question, which is any thoughts on the impact that a K-shaped recovery, i.e. a recovery in which you see the losers and the winners diverging even more widely, that any thoughts on the impact a K-shaped recovery would have on the tourism sector? And I wonder, Vice President, whether or not you're worried about this, that the inequality that you're seeing more generally is going to play out even more markedly in tourism.
Yeah, that's a good point too. This discussion is happening, I think, a week earlier, because next Wednesday the College of Commissioners will see the forecast, the economic forecast, which will be the first, if you like, post-pandemic. So unfortunately, we haven't seen the figures yet, so we don't know if it will be a V shape or a K-shape, or this. I would know more. I don't want to speculate and speak out of my mind. I'm sure I could share in more confidence a view with you once I know what our experts are telling us next week.
Okay, well, fair enough. Louise, do you want to address that, though, whether or not you think you're going to see a very uneven return to travel and tourism?
Okay, I think that during this crisis, we have prepared a lot of scenarios. And until now, we didn't do any one that is right. So I hope one day will be the good one. But when you see, for example, what Eurocontrol is considering or IATA, as I said before, everybody thinks that we are not going to have a recovery to the capacity of 2019 until 2023, 2024. But also depends of the vaccination rollout in the different countries. One thing that is important, and you asked before, is about the situation in Latin America, for example. Is important the Sinovac vaccine that they are using there, for example, is still not recognized in the EMA, and it's something that is important because you have a lot of people there with that type of vaccine. It's something that can help to the recovery. So what we have seen in previous crises is that in the 9/11 or the financial crisis, that after a period of 1 year and a half, things come back. We are not so sure because this crisis is different. What we see is that there is a huge pent-up demand. Leisure traffic is coming back. VFR traffic is there. When you can fly, you have a lot of people that want to fly. I think the uncertainty in this situation is if all these Zooms meeting and Teams meeting had changed the behavior of the corporate customers. That is still a huge uncertainty.
And is it possible to make any judgment on that yet?
At IAG, what we are considering is that in 2023, we can be around minus 15% of the corporate traffic that we had in 2019. That's one of the scenarios that we are considering. And for that reason, we need to be more efficient because the quality of the revenues is going to be lower.
And what about the possibility that actually everything grows, that this turns out to be nothing other than a hiatus in the overall growth of travel, not only leisure but business travel? Do you predict that that's also a possible scenario, or almost certainly corporate travel changes structurally as a result of this?
I think there are markets that are going to be like that. For example, if you see China domestic traffic right now is higher than the traffic that they had in 2019. If you see
internal air travel within China.
Yes, the domestic traffic is even higher than the traffic they had before, and the crisis started there. when you see United States, for example, they are recovering very soon the capacity in the domestic market. Even they see that in the last quarter of this year, they consider they are going to have a business pent-up demand, a lot of people that they want to travel. The doubt is about the international travel. But again, I think if we can reopen the UK, US, and Europe, US corridor, this is going to be very useful.
I want to just come to some last thoughts to Maribel and Jeff. Maribel, you talked about international protocols, right? And actually getting some global agreements. If you could get all the governments in one place at one time, what would you put on that priority list of protocols?
Well, what I would say what we are actually telling to all the governments is that we need to have a uniform protocol across the world, simple to understand, that all the businesses can put in place, a plan that everybody can understand. And what we need now is testing, and a risk-based approach. We should be able to travel. We have to remove the barriers. We all know what are the protocols, but we need to have this platform that is going to be combining test or not test, vaccine or not vaccine, depending on the case, and immunity or not. We are agnostic in the platform, but we need a plan for it. And this plan needs to be for the rest of the world. We need that the country has to change their mindset, because what they need to do is to contain the spread and to coexist, because we don't know what it's going to be like afterwards. Maybe we have another pandemic. I wish not, but we need to be ready for it. And we cannot, react every time. We have to have a plan, pre-crisis, crisis, and recovery, because we have now crisis, like pandemic like that, but we have hurricanes, we have many things worldwide that we have to, of course, have those international coordination frameworks. And for that is super important, the public and the private coordination. Without that, and without not working together, would be really, really difficult. Remember that last year, in 2019, we don't even want to know about the 2020, when we lost 49% of our GDP, travel and tourism GDP. 1 out of 4 new jobs were because of travel and tourism. We cannot lose that. It's very important. So we have now an opportunity and the time to recover, being unified and having those coordinated protocols.
Maribel, thank you. Jeff, also one final thought to you. Listening to Luis, I'm struck by actually how much movement there is, not just in terms of travel, but in the business, on the business side of this. Things getting back to where they were, 23, 24. Yes, debt. Yes, some businesses getting smaller, but the prospect of consolidation. In the US hotel and hospitality market, do you see a similar pattern? Do you think that as things get back, you are also going to see a wave of consolidation and structural change too? Jeff, you're muted. Forgive me.
The second most repeated phrase this year, right? Sorry about that. I think there will be consolidation. It's just a natural evolution. I think the general feeling, of course, is that hopefully we go on another 10-year upcycle like we just went through before the pandemic, and that spurs a lot of activity in that consolidation and acquisition front. So as far as fundamental changes to the industry, I'm not convinced there will be major fundamental changes. I think as people get back to their normal ways of traveling and start planning further out, then lodging, hotel stays will become similar to what they were. Certainly there could be some operational efficiencies. Tightening up the housekeeping that's happened during the pandemic could be something that that continues after we get back to normal. But by and large, I think the industry is preparing to learn from the shortcomings that it had here. So in case there is another opportunity, and act quicker and try to have a plan in place to ensure that whatever happens, we can adjust and chart the path sooner. Rather than waiting for the path to be charted for us.
Well, Jeff, thank you. I see that our hour is up, and as is the world of that we are not in the world of leisure or tourism or travel, but in the world too often now of these digital calls, and on the hour we move from one meeting to the next. So I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to Margarita Esquinas, to the Vice President, to the CEO of IAG, Luis Gallego, Maribel Rodriguez, Jeff Higley. It's been brilliant to have your input too from BHN, from the World Travel and Tourism Council. And I should say one final thing. You don't normally think you're going to go into an hour of conversation and come out feeling quite as upbeat as I do at the end of this one. Partly, I think it's because of the dynamism that you see in the business, but mostly it's because there's such a positive message of us getting back to travel and tourism. So a heartfelt thank you for your time this afternoon and wishing everyone a very good day. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.